Well, there's enormous interest tonight in issues around Islam and Israel, but we'll start with a question on Australian politics. It's from James Weishart.
There was a lot of media coverage over the last week where Tony Abbott punched the wall near a political rival head after losing a student election in 1977. Does the panel believe it's fair that a current political figure should be held accountable for a misconduct event when he was a young uni student?
Sheridan.
Well, Tony, it's been a difficult issue for me because in 1977, when this allegedly occurred, Tony Abbott was my best friend. I mightn't have been his best friend. I suspect he had more friends than I did, but he was my best friend. And, you know, let me explain it this way. I am certain no such incident occurred. Let me explain it this way. Somebody said to me, I saw Tony Jones walk outside and beat up a blind man who was selling postcards, steal his money and run off. I'd know that that story is untrue because I know Tony Jones well enough to know that that's not just inconsistent with his personality, it's inconceivable.
Well, unless, of course, the blind man was an honest person and then went to David Marr and told his story.
Yeah, and I don't believe that story for a minute. Tony Abbott I knew very, very well in 1977. It's difficult for me to talk about this because it impugns my status as an independent commentator.
I mean, you've written quite a deal about it, including a pretty savage critique of David Marr,
because his disgraceful, idiotic, slanderous essay is full of inaccuracies, so many mistakes. He talks about DLP students at campus. There were no DLP students at campus. There were some students affiliated with the National Civic Council. They are different organisations. Why bother to get it right, you know, when you can just make a slander and a slur? And my interest in talking about this is simply because I think you have to place a very high premium on accuracy, and you also have to place a certain premium on fairness. Now, I've been
Can
very
I just interrupt
critical...
there, because I believe David Marr actually was contacted by Tony Abbott after the publication of the essay. He said he didn't agree with everything in it, but he described it as thoughtful and highly professional.
God, that shows what a forgiving Christian fellow Tony Abbott is, doesn't it? But I got to tell you, I have been very critical of many policy positions Tony Abbott has taken for the first half of the Howard government, more recently rejecting the Malaysian solution and so on. So I have no interest in this. This diminishes my position in Australian public life. But I know it's untrue, and I know it doesn't bear any resemblance at all to the Tony Abbott that I knew then. And all the people who know him in politics now will tell you he doesn't operate off a short fuse. He's extraordinarily committed to helping folks out and working for charities and all that. But I hate even saying this because I'm a journalist. I'm not trained to talk well of politicians. But the whole attack was so unfair and dishonest, and a lot of it was sectarian. There are a lot of people in the secular end of the media who just hate the idea of a conservative practising Catholic having a national position of leadership in Australia. And this was a very ugly, nasty thing that has happened in Australia in recent weeks, and it wouldn't have happened to any other politician.
Let's go to Irving Wallach on this. Oddly enough, there are two panellists who were involved deeply in student politics at Sydney University. You weren't a close friend of Tony Abbott, but you knew him at that time.
Yeah, I was the law faculty representative on the SRC from 1975 to 1977. 77 was my last year out, and I was on my way out. I'd actually got around to finishing my law degree that year. So I got to know him in that year. And I have to say that the Tony Abbott that Greg is talking about seems to be a different person to the one that I knew. Because the Tony Abbott that I knew and that a lot of other people on the SRC knew, who were not his political mates, was a fairly pushy and physical person. He was a man who was known to be fond of his beer with his college mates, and he was known of getting around with the engineers and the college boys. And he was known as, you know, not being beyond being quite physical about it. Now, I never saw him...
So was that something you... First of all, you know, the celebrated incident of the... where the wall was hit on either side, allegedly, of a young woman's head. Were you there? Did you witness that? Or did you even know about it at the time?
I didn't know about it on the night. I was at the SRC that night. I was scrutineering for 4 students who were elected that night. But I heard nothing about the incident itself until recently. However, I do know all 4 of the people involved. Tony Abbott, not particularly well. I know Barbara Ramjan, who was the successful presidential candidate. And I also know David Patch, who is the person who's now come forward as the witness. Barbara is someone who I knew through mental health issues. David Patch is a fellow barrister. And Tony Abbott we all know. And I have to say that the account is consistent with the behaviour of Tony Abbott that I saw.
Well, we should be clear about this. Did you ever witness any form of violence by Tony Abbott himself in those days when he was a student and you were there in the Student Representative Council?
I saw Tony Abbott on a couple of occasions at front lawn meetings, which were meetings on the front lawn of the university, strangely enough, where he would arrive with some of his supporters, a group of supporters from college engineers, whoever they were, and he was not afraid of just barging into meetings, into particular meetings on the front lawn and being, you know, physical. But I never saw violence in that sense. I've never seen him throw a punch. There were plenty of stories about it and about his disrespect of various people who he didn't agree with. In particular, a lot of disrespect towards women who were not of his politics.
Well, I'm just going to go back to Greg Sheridan. I mean, it sounds like we're talking about two different people here.
No, not at all.
Both at the same university.
I accept really what Irving's saying. Tony was an aggressive young student politician, absolutely. I was only saying specifically that it was inconceivable to me that he would have ever physically bullied a woman. That was absolutely inconceivable. Everything. Did we have too much to drink? Oh, my Lord, I have to plead. There may have been occasions, Irving, there may have been occasions when you had too much beer, you know.
I can only tell you my advice I give to most clients, and that is say nothing.
And were we aggressive in student politics? We were opposing an amalgam of Trotskyists, Maoists and Stalinist communists who used assault as a regular weapon of politics. Put Michael Danby in hospital, put Peter Costello with a broken arm. These were seriously violent and bad people. And yes, we stood up for ourselves, but that's all a million miles away from saying that Tony Abbott physically bullied a woman much smaller than himself and all the rest of it. That's a different planet altogether.
All right, I'm going